To approach the ancient city of Petra is to perform an act of pilgrimage through stone and time. You enter the Sick, a narrow winding canyon whose sandstone walls, hundreds of feet high, seem to swallow the sky. As you venture deeper, the world outside vanishes, replaced by the cool twilight and the echoing silence of the chasm. And then it happens. A sliver of impossible, ornate architecture appears in the sliver of light ahead, and as you emerge from the darkness, the vision is revealed. The treasury, a temple facade of breathtaking beauty, not built, but carved as if by magic from the living rock. This single image defies all logic. It is the centerpiece of a magnificent city that by all rights should not exist. This documentary will investigate the story of the Nabataeans, the mysterious desert nomads who built this metropolis and accumulated wealth that rivaled empires. We will uncover how they engineered one of the most sophisticated and powerful operations of ancient trade the world has ever seen. This is not the story of a kingdom built on conquest, but of a powerful cartel that mastered the desert economy and held a monopoly on the sense of the gods. In the bustling markets and solemn temples of the Roman Empire, the gears of the imperial economy ran on a fuel as vital as grain and as precious as gold. Incense, frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins harvested from scraggly trees in the distant, almost mythical lands of southern Arabia, were indispensable. They were the scent of prayer in the temples, the perfume of luxury in the villas of the elite, and the sacred aroma that accompanied the souls of the dead to the underworld. The demand was insatiable, and the price was astronomical. Yet for all its power, Rome, the world's greatest consumer, controlled neither the source of these commodities nor the perilous routes they traveled. Between the producers in Arabia Felix, or Fortunate Arabia, and the consumers in Rome stood a barrier more formidable than any legion, the great Arabian desert. And in that desert, a quiet, brilliant, and powerful group of masters had risen to prominence. They were the Nabataeans. To the outside world, they were mysterious nomads, but in reality, they were the undisputed kings of this lucrative ancient trade. They were the essential middlemen, the gatekeepers, the founders of a commercial empire built on sand and stone. They had engineered a solution to the desert, transforming it from a lethal barrier into their greatest economic asset. This investigation will deconstruct the genius of the Nabataean cartel. We will journey to the wind-swept plains where the incense trees grow to understand the immense value of the prize. We will uncover the secrets of the Nabataeans' origins and their intimate mastery of the arid lands, a knowledge that was the foundation of their power. We will explore their revolutionary technology, a miracle of hydraulic engineering that allowed them to conjure water from rock and sustain cities where none should stand. We will join a virtual reconstruction of one of their great camel caravans, a massive logistical machine that moved this immense wealth across the sands. Our journey will take us deep into the heart of their enterprise, the fortress city of Petra. Here, we will analyze how they structured their business like a modern cartel, using strategic outposts, protection fees, and absolute control over vital resources to eliminate competitors and dictate prices. We will also examine their perilous diplomatic dance with their most important and most dangerous client, the Roman Empire. Finally, we will investigate why this magnificent civilization and its powerful economy seemingly vanished, rendered obsolete by new technologies and shifting patterns of global trade, leaving behind only a silent rock-carved ghost as a testament to their incredible ingenuity. This is the story of how a lost tribe of nomads engineered an empire of commerce. To understand the rise of the Nabataeans, one must first understand the aroma of the ancient world. The Roman Empire, for all its marble grandeur, was a world of overwhelming smells. The sweat of the crowds, the stench of the tanneries, the smoke of countless cooking fires. In this sensory chaos, one scent rose above all others, a fragrance that signified power,
purity and the presence of the divine. This was the scent of incense. It was more than a luxury. It was a fundamental technology of Roman life, an essential commodity that drove a global economy and fueled one of the most profitable operations of ancient trade in human history. The control of this trade was a prize of unimaginable value, and it was a prize the Nabataeans intended to win. The source of this immense wealth was a world away from Rome, in a remote and narrowly defined corner of the globe. On the arid, sun-scorched coastal plains of southern Arabia, what is today Yemen and Oman, grew the gnarled, scraggly, and entirely unremarkable-looking trees of the Boswellia and Culmiferous species. These were the sole producers of the world's supply of frankincense and myrrh. The harvesting process was laborious and precise. Workers would slash the bark with a special knife, and from these wounds, the tree would bleed a milky white sap. This sap would slowly harden in the dry desert air, forming translucent amber-colored tears. These crystalline tears of resin were the raw material of the incense trade, a commodity whose rarity and geographically limited source created one of the most lopsided dynamics of supply and demand in the ancient world. The Romans called this distant land Arabia Felix, Fortunate Arabia, and its fortune was entirely derived from its monopoly on these precious resins. Frankincense was first and foremost the scent of religion. For the Romans, whose relationship with their gods was deeply transactional, burning incense was a critical act of communication. The fragrant smoke rising from the altars of thousands of temples across the empire was not merely a pleasant offering. It was seen as a physical vehicle that carried mortal prayers upwards to the heavens. No major state ceremony, no public festival, no triumph for a victorious general was complete without the thick, sweet smoke of burning frankincense to purify the air and appease the gods. It was so integral to the state cult that it created a near-constant state-sponsored demand, making it a pillar of the economy of the sacred. To be without it was to risk divine disfavor, a risk the deeply superstitious Romans were unwilling to take. Myrrh, the sister resin, held a different but equally vital place in the Roman world. Its aromatic properties were matched by its practical applications. In medicine, it was a powerful antiseptic and analgesic, a key ingredient in poultices and potions used to treat everything from wounds to indigestion. But its most profound role was in the rituals of death. Myrrh was the primary scent used in Roman funerals and embalming processes. It masked the odor of decay and was believed to preserve the body for the afterlife. For the Roman elite, a lavish funeral, complete with copious amounts of burning myrrh, was the final act of status and remembrance. The historian Pliny the Elder famously claimed that Emperor Nero burned an entire year's harvest of Arabian incense at the funeral of his wife Poppaea, a display of extravagant consumption that, even if exaggerated, reveals the commodity's immense cultural and emotional value. This created a seller's market of epic proportions. The demand was immense, geographically widespread, and culturally inelastic. It was a necessity, not a choice. The supply, however, was finite and geographically isolated. This fundamental imbalance in the market drove the price of incense to astonishing heights. Pliny wrote that the highest quality frankincense was at times worth more than its weight in gold. An entire river of Roman gold and silver flowed eastwards each year to pay for this addiction. This colossal transfer of wealth, one of the defining features of the imperial economy, did not escape the notice of the strategists and merchants who observed its flow. The incense trade was not just a business, it was a potential pipeline to unimaginable power and influence. This, then, was the prize. A commodity born from the sap of a desert tree, transformed by cultural and religious necessity into one of the most valuable materials in the world. The entire economic system was a marvel of value creation, a testament to how belief and demand could shape the patterns of ancient trade. But for the wealth of Arabia Felix to reach the altars of Rome, it had to survive the most perilous leg of its journey, a 1,000-mile trek across the unforgiving sands of the Arabian desert. The civilization that could control that crossing would control the trade itself.
The Roman world, with its ordered cities, paved roads, and cultivated landscapes, ended abruptly at the edge of the great Arabian desert. To the imperial mind, this vast expanse of rock and sand was a void, a terrifying empty quarter of the map, hostile to life and impassable for armies. But the desert was not empty. It was home to a people who saw it not as a barrier, but as a sanctuary and a highway. These were the Nabataeans. Their story is not one of kings and conquerors in the traditional sense, but of a people whose profound and intimate mastery of a harsh environment became the foundational capital for an empire of ancient trade. Their rise is a testament to the fact that in the unforgiving economy of the desert, knowledge is a resource more valuable than gold. The precise origins of the Nabataeans are shrouded in the mists of history, but by the 4th century BC, they emerge in the historical record as a powerful, Aramaic-speaking nomadic tribe moving with their herds through the lands of modern-day Jordan. They were in essence a product of the desert. Their culture, their social structure, and their very perception of the world were shaped by the relentless demands of a life lived on the move in a land of scarce water and extreme temperatures. Unlike the settled agricultural empires surrounding them, their wealth was mobile. Measured in flocks of sheep and goats, their homes were not cities of stone but tents of black goat hair. And their greatest skill, honed over countless generations, was the art of survival. This ecological knowledge was in essence the Nabataeans' first and most critical trade secret. They knew the desert's rhythms and its hidden language. They could read the subtle shifts in the landscape to predict the location of underground water. They knew the secret paths through treacherous mountain passes and the locations of sheltered canyons where a caravan could rest, safe from predators and the searing sun. For an outsider, like a Roman legionary or a rival merchant, the desert was a death trap of dehydration, disorientation, and flash floods. But for the Nabataeans, it was a fortress. The blistering heat and the waterless expanses that would destroy an invading army were the very walls that protected them and their burgeoning trade routes, creating a natural monopoly that was almost impossible to break. This environmental advantage was the bedrock upon which their entire economic future would be built. Central to their mastery of this domain was a single revolutionary piece of biological technology, the dromedary camel. While other cultures had used the camel, the Nabataeans perfected its role as the engine of long-distance desert trade. The camel was a miracle of biological engineering, perfectly adapted to the challenges of the Nabataeans' world. Its wide, splayed feet allowed it to walk effortlessly on shifting sand. Its double rows of eyelashes and closable nostrils protected it from blending sandstorms. Most critically, its legendary ability to endure long periods without water, thanks to a highly efficient physiology, meant that it could traverse vast arid stretches between oases that were impassable for any other beast of burden. A single camel could carry hundreds of pounds of cargo for weeks at a time, transforming the desert from an obstacle into a viable, high-capacity commercial highway. The Nabataeans did not simply use the camel, they perfected its integration into a sophisticated logistical system. They developed specialized saddles that allowed for the secure and balanced loading of bulky cargo. They bred their herds for strength and endurance, and they understood with an almost scientific precision the exact limits of their animals' capabilities, allowing them to plan caravan routes that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. This mastery of camel transport was the technological key that unlocked the economic potential of the incense trade. It allowed them to move a high-value, low-weight commodity across 1,000 miles of hostile territory with a reliability that no competitor could match. Thus, the foundations of the Nabataean cartel were laid long before the first block of stone was carved at Petra. They were a people who possessed a unique and non-transferable set of skills, an encyclopedic knowledge of the desert's geography,
a mastery of survival in an arid climate, and the technological advantage of the camel trade. They were perfectly positioned at the nexus of the ancient trade world, sitting astride the land bridge between Arabia and the Mediterranean. They were the only ones who could reliably and safely move the priceless resins from the producers in the south to the eager markets in the north. They were transforming from nomads into the indispensable gatekeepers of a multi-continental economy.
The mastery of the camel solved the problem of distance. The knowledge of the desert solved the problem of navigation. But to transform a nomadic enterprise into a permanent city-based commercial empire, the Nabataeans had to solve the most fundamental challenge of their existence: the scarcity of water. The region around Petra is a hyper-arid landscape, receiving less than 6 inches of rain per year, a mere fraction of what is needed to sustain a small village, let alone a thriving metropolis and the thousands of camels required for a continental trade network. The solution they engineered was not just clever, it was a miracle of hydraulic science, a testament to a people who learned not just to find water, but to command it. This technological mastery was the true foundation of the Nabataean economy. The genius of the Nabataean approach was their perspective. They understood that the scant annual rainfall, when it did arrive, came in the form of violent, sudden flash floods. For most, these events were a terrifying and destructive force, a torrent of water that would rage through the canyons for a few hours before vanishing into the sand. But the Nabataeans saw this destructive force for what it truly was: an immense, concentrated resource, delivered in a challenging package. Their entire hydrological system was designed around a single, brilliant principle: to capture every possible drop of this fleeting bounty, tame its violent energy, and store it for the long, dry months ahead. They did not drill wells, they harvested the sky. To achieve this, they transformed the sandstone landscape into a massive integrated water collection machine. Their engineers, with an uncanny understanding of geology and fluid dynamics, carved an intricate network of channels and dams directly into the rock faces. Small, strategically placed dams would be built across narrow gullies to slow the initial powerful surge of a flash flood. From these collection points, a web of rock-cut channels, some just inches wide, would snake for miles along the canyon walls. These channels, meticulously angled to ensure a steady, manageable flow, acted like gutters on a colossal roof, intercepting the runoff and diverting it away from the valley floor where it would be lost, guiding it instead towards its final destination, the cistern. The cistern was the heart of the Nabataean water system and the secret to their permanent settlement. Dotted across the landscape, hidden from plain sight, were hundreds of these man-made, underground reservoirs hewn directly out of the sandstone. Some were small, designed to serve a single dwelling. Others were vast, cavernous chambers capable of holding hundreds of thousands of gallons. Their interiors were coated with a thick, waterproof plaster made from lime and ash, a technology that ensured almost no water was lost to seepage. These were not mere wells, they were water banks. The flash floods were the deposits, and the Nabataeans could make withdrawals throughout the year, turning a few hours of rain into a year-long supply of life. This stored wealth of water was the capital that fueled their entire civilization. This hydraulic mastery reached its zenith within Petra itself. The city was not just a collection of tombs and temples, it was a marvel of urban plumbing. Terracotta pipes, sealed with mortar, were cleverly integrated into the rock, creating a pressurized system that could deliver fresh water throughout the city. This system fed public fountains or nymphaeums, sustained lush gardens in the desert, supplied the needs of a population estimated at over 20,000, and even filled a large open-air swimming pool. The ability to create such an oasis of life and luxury in the heart of the desert was the ultimate display of Nabataean power and ingenuity, a clear signal to visiting merchants and dignitaries of the immense wealth generated by their ancient trade monopoly. Ultimately, this hydraulic mastery was more than a convenience, it was a powerful economic weapon. By creating artificial oases, the Nabataeans could establish permanent fortified outposts along their trade routes, forcing caravans to use their pathways. Control over the water sources meant control over the routes themselves. They could sustain their own massive caravans while denying this critical resource to any potential rivals. Water became a commodity they could sell or withhold, a tool to enforce their cartel's dominance. The tolls collected at these engineered oases were a significant revenue stream, another layer in their sophisticated economy. The Nabataeans understood the fundamental law of the desert. The one who controls the water controls everything.
With the water supply secured and the desert's pathways mastered, the Nabataeans could now deploy the engine of their prosperity, the Great Incense Caravan. This was not a mere procession of merchants. It was a massive, mobile, and highly sophisticated logistical operation, the desert equivalent of a modern shipping fleet. Each caravan was a self-contained temporary city, a moving corporation that transported not only high-value goods, but also the culture, security, and authority of the Nabataean state. The caravan was the physical manifestation of their dominance in the ancient trade of incense, a machine meticulously designed for profit and survival in one of the world's most challenging commercial environments. The scale of these ventures was immense. A major caravan could consist of thousands of camels and hundreds of men stretching for miles across the desert landscape. Such an undertaking was far beyond the means of an individual merchant. It was a corporate enterprise, often funded by a consortium of wealthy investors from Petra's elite. The capital required was enormous. It was needed to purchase the frankincense and myrrh from the producers in southern Arabia, to acquire and maintain the vast herds of camels, to hire the specialized personnel, and to provision the entire expedition for a journey that could last for months and cover over 1,000 miles of punishing terrain. The level of organization required was a testament to the Nabataeans' transition from a nomadic tribe into a mature commercial power with a complex, credit-based economy. The personnel of the caravan were not simply traders, they were a highly specialized, hierarchical team. At the top was the caravan master, the archon, an experienced and powerful figure responsible for the entire operation. Under him were the specialist guides, men who possess the traditional, intimate knowledge of the desert, the true human assets of the Nabataean trade. They navigated by the stars, by the shape of the dunes, and by an almost psychic understanding of the environment. The bulk of the personnel consisted of cameleers, tough, experienced men responsible for the health and loading of the animals. Crucially, every major caravan was accompanied by a significant contingent of heavily armed guards. These were the soldiers of the Nabataean cartel, their presence a clear deterrent to the marauding tribes whose territories the caravan had to cross. The daily operation of the caravan was a masterpiece of disciplined routine. The day began before dawn, loading the camels in the cool morning air. The journey was timed to avoid the worst of the midday heat, with long rests in the afternoon. At night, the caravan would form a defensive circle. The camels hobbled in the center, the cargo piled high, and armed sentries posted on the perimeter. The routes were not random. They were carefully managed pathways that led from one Nabataean-controlled watering station to the next. At these outposts, small, fortified oases sustained by the Nabataean hydraulic engineering, the caravan could rest, replenish its water supplies, and pay the necessary tolls and protection fees that formed a key part of the cartel's revenue. This network of stations was the fixed infrastructure that made the mobile trade possible. The cargo itself was treated with reverence befitting its value.
The frankincense and myrrh were transported in specially sealed bags to preserve their aroma, were loaded onto the strongest camels, and were always kept in the most secure central position within the caravan's formation. But the caravan was not just a one-way enterprise. On the journey south, the camels would carry goods for trade with the southern Arabians: textiles, wine from the Mediterranean, fine metalwork and glass. On the return journey, in addition to the priceless resins, the caravan would often carry other exotic goods from the east, spices from India, and silks from the distant lands of the Seers, which had arrived in Arabia via the maritime routes of the Indian Ocean. The Nabataeans, as consummate middlemen, took a cut of every transaction, their caravans the central artery for a complex multi-continental economy. The arrival of a great caravan at its final destination, the port city of Gaza on the Mediterranean coast, was a major economic event. Here, the raw resins would be offloaded, processed, graded for quality, and sold, an enormous markup to the Roman and Greek merchants who would then ship them across the sea. The final price paid by a Roman senator in the Forum could be 100 times the initial price paid to the farmer in Arabia. This incredible profit margin was the reward for mastering the desert. It was the return on investment for the immense logistical, technological, and military effort required to move a fragile, aromatic tear of tree sap 1,000 miles. This was the caravan machine in action, the engine that turned sand and scent into the stone temples of Petra.
Every great commercial empire needs a capital, a central node where wealth is accumulated, power is displayed, and strategy is decided. For the Nabataean cartel, this capital was Petra. Carved from the rose-red sandstone cliffs of southern Jordan, Petra was more than a city. It was a statement. It was a declaration of wealth and power, a fortress, a sanctuary, and the ultimate expression of the Nabataean genius for transforming the hostile desert into their greatest ally. The city's very existence, hidden from the world in its canyon fortress, was the ultimate secret weapon in their control of the incense trade. It was the headquarters of a desert-based economy, a metropolis whose architecture and location were perfectly engineered for commerce and control. Petra's location was a masterpiece of strategic geography. It was not situated on a major river or a fertile plain, the typical cradles of ancient urbanism. Instead, it was hidden deep within a labyrinth of impassable mountains and canyons. The only practical entrance was the Sick, the dramatic mile-long fissure in the rock that we journeyed through at our story's beginning. This narrow passage, in some places barely 10 feet wide, made the city a virtually impregnable natural fortress. A mere handful of defenders could hold the entrance against an entire army, a critical advantage for a trading power that preferred to avoid open military conflict. This defensibility made Petra the perfect secure vault. It was here, protected by walls of living rock, that the Nabataeans could safely warehouse their priceless commodities, store their immense wealth, and manage their sprawling commercial operations far from the prying eyes of rival powers or the grasping hands of would-be conquerors. But Petra was no mere military outpost. It was a vibrant cosmopolitan metropolis, the bustling heart of a multi-continental economy. Beyond the iconic treasury and monastery, which were likely royal tombs designed to awe visitors, the city unfolded into a wide valley. Here lay the civic and commercial center. A grand colonnaded street built in the Roman style formed the city's main artery. It was lined with what were once shops, markets, and administrative buildings. This was where the business of the cartel was conducted. Here, caravan masters would report, ledgers were balanced, and deals were struck with merchants from across the ancient world.
The city's architecture, a unique and stunning fusion of their own native traditions with Hellenistic and Roman influences, spoke of a people who were not isolated desert dwellers, but sophisticated, worldly players at the center of global ancient trade. The city was a testament to the staggering wealth that this trade generated. The Nabataeans, enriched by their monopoly, invested their profits in monumental construction. They carved hundreds of elaborate tombs for their elite, each one a public display of family wealth and status. They built a magnificent great temple, a theater that could seat thousands, and luxurious villas for the city's merchant princes. And as we have seen, they engineered a sophisticated water system that sustained public fountains and lush gardens, creating an oasis of impossible luxury. This opulence was a deliberate business strategy. It was a way to project an image of overwhelming success and stability, reassuring investors, impressing clients, and intimidating rivals. The city itself was a form of marketing, its splendor a direct reflection of the profitability of the incense cartel. Furthermore, Petra was strategically positioned as the central hub of their regional trade network. While the main incense route passed nearby, Petra itself was a nexus where multiple secondary routes converged. Caravans from the north, east, and west would arrive here, bringing goods to trade and seeking passage through Nabataean-controlled territory. Every transaction, every toll, every protection fee was managed from this central command post. The city was not just a passive beneficiary of the trade passing by, it was the active beating heart of the entire system. It was the brain of a desert-based economy, a metropolis whose architecture and location were perfectly engineered for commerce and control. Petra was the ultimate symbol of their success, a city built by the scent of the gods.
The magnificent city of Petra and the colossal caravan machine were the visible outcomes of Nabataean success. But beneath the surface, driving this prosperity was a deliberately engineered and ruthlessly efficient business model. The Nabataeans were not merely participants in the ancient trade of incense, they were its masters. They had structured their operations not as a free market enterprise, but as a cartel, a powerful association of producers and merchants who colluded to control a commodity, restrict competition, and fix prices for their own enrichment. Understanding this business model reveals the true genius of their desert empire and the sophisticated nature of their command over the regional economy. The first and most fundamental pillar of their cartel was the control of territory and infrastructure. The incense route was not a single open highway. It was a network of paths, passes, and oases that the Nabataeans systematically brought under their dominion. Along these routes, they established a chain of fortified outposts, watchtowers, and protected caravanserais. These were not simply rest stops, they were control points, the physical nodes of their commercial web. Any caravan wishing to pass through Nabataean territory, which was, by design, the only safe and viable territory, was forced to use these specific routes and stop at these specific stations. Here, the Nabataeans levied a series of systematic and non-negotiable fees, tolls for passage, charges for protection, and fees for access to water and fodder. This was not random banditry. It was a highly organized system of taxation, a private tariff that every merchant had to pay, ensuring a constant stream of revenue for the cartel's coffers. This control was reinforced by their most powerful weapon, their monopoly on water. As we have seen, the Nabataeans' hydraulic engineering was a marvel of survival, but it was also a potent tool of economic warfare. By creating the only reliable, large-scale water sources in the vast arid stretches, they created an unbreakable dependency. A rival merchant could, in theory, attempt to forge a new path to bypass Nabataean tolls, but he would be traveling into a waterless void. The Nabataeans turned the desert scarcity into the ultimate barrier to entry for any potential competitor.
Their control over this life-sustaining resource was absolute. They could deny water to unauthorized caravans, effectively sentencing them to death by dehydration. This environmental dominance was the cartel's ultimate enforcement mechanism, a natural monopoly made artificial, ensuring that all trade flowed through the channels they controlled and on the terms they dictated. Beyond physical control, the Nabataeans practiced a sophisticated form of market and information manipulation. For centuries, they were the sole conduit of information between the incense-producing lands of Arabia Felix and the Mediterranean world. This allowed them to control the narrative. Classical authors like Herodotus reported fantastical stories, likely originating from traders, of flying serpents and monstrous bats that guarded the frankincense trees. These tales, whether believed literally or not, served a crucial business purpose. They shrouded the source in mystery and danger, discouraging any ambitious Roman merchant from attempting to bypass the Nabataean middlemen and go directly to the source. Furthermore, by controlling the entire supply chain, the Nabataeans could manage the flow of goods into the final markets at ports like Gotha. They could hold back shipments to create artificial scarcity, driving up prices before releasing their goods for sale at the peak of the market, a classic example of price fixing on an international scale. This entire system was supported by a shrewd and pragmatic foreign policy. The Nabataeans understood that their relatively small kingdom could not survive through military might alone, especially with powers like Ptolemaic Egypt, the Hasmonean kingdom of Judea, and eventually Rome as their neighbors and clients. Their primary tool was diplomacy, lubricated by the immense wealth of their economy. They paid tribute when necessary, formed strategic alliances, and acted as a stabilizing buffer state in the region. Their military was not designed for conquest, but for defense and the protection of their trade routes. This implied force was a crucial part of their business model. The message to neighboring tribes and potential challengers was clear. It was far more profitable to cooperate with the Nabataean system and receive a share of the wealth than to challenge it and face disruption and potential retribution. They were masters of risk management, ensuring the stability of their ancient trade through a delicate balance of wealth, diplomacy, and the constant underlying threat of force. This was a Nabataean cartel in its entirety, a perfect fusion of environmental mastery, logistical brilliance, market manipulation, and geopolitical savvy.
In the sophisticated business of the Nabataean cartel, there was one client who overshadowed all others, a customer whose insatiable demand was the primary driver of their immense profits. This client was Rome. The relationship was symbiotic, but deeply unequal. The Nabataeans were the sole suppliers of a product Rome desperately needed, a classic seller's market. But their customer was a military and economic superpower with a long and bloody history of eliminating inconvenient middlemen and seizing direct control of valuable resources. The story of the Nabataeans in the final centuries of their independence is the story of a perilous diplomatic dance, a high-stakes balancing act of appeasement, alliance, and strategic accommodation designed to keep their most important customer happy and their own kingdom intact. As Rome's power expanded across the eastern Mediterranean in the 1st century BC, the Nabataean kingdom found itself in a precarious position. They were no longer just a remote desert power, but a direct neighbor to a burgeoning empire. Roman generals like Pompey the Great campaigned in the region, and the wealth of Petra did not go unnoticed. For a rapacious Roman general, the fabled treasury of the Nabataeans was a tempting prize. The Nabataeans, pragmatic above all else, understood that a direct military confrontation with the Roman legions would be suicidal. Their small, desert-adapted army, perfect for policing trade routes, was no match for the organized might of the Roman war machine. Their survival depended not on fighting Rome, but on making themselves too valuable to conquer. Their primary strategy was to formally integrate their kingdom into the Roman political orbit as a client kingdom. This was a common arrangement in the Roman East, where local rulers maintained a high degree of internal autonomy in exchange for aligning their foreign policy with Rome's interests. The Nabataean kings, such as Aretas III and his successors, would pay tribute to Rome, provide auxiliary troops for Roman campaigns, and publicly acknowledge the supremacy of Roman authority. They even began to incorporate Roman architectural styles into their own cities and add the emperor's portrait to their coinage, all public signals of their loyalty. This client status was a brilliant political maneuver. It placated Roman ambition and reframed their relationship. They were no longer an independent rival, but a loyal, if distant, partner in the Roman world order. This political maneuvering was funded and enabled by the immense profits of their ancient trade. The Nabataeans used their fabulous wealth as their most effective diplomatic tool. They could afford the lavish gifts, which were in reality thinly veiled bribes, to influential Roman generals and governors. They could pay the heavy tributes demanded by Rome without crippling their own economy. Their wealth allowed them to finance the construction of temples and public buildings dedicated to the Roman emperors, further cementing their public image as loyal allies. In essence, the Nabataeans used the profits from the incense trade to pay for the political protection that allowed them to continue controlling that same trade. It was a circular, self-sustaining system of appeasement, a cost of doing business in a world dominated by a single superpower. However, this client relationship was a double-edged sword. While it provided a shield against outright conquest, it also brought increased Roman scrutiny and involvement in their affairs. Roman merchants began to travel to the region, eager to get a larger piece of the lucrative incense economy. Roman officials were a more common sight in the cities of the Nabataean kingdom. The Nabataeans were forced to walk a fine line, protecting the secrets of their trade routes and their monopolistic practices while simultaneously appearing to be open and cooperative allies. They were, in effect, trying to hide the true nature of their cartel in plain sight. They maintained the fiction that the high price of incense was due to the immense dangers of the journey and the savagery of the tribes along the way, all while their own organization was the primary force controlling the supply and setting the price. It was a dangerous game of economic deception, played out on a geopolitical stage. For decades, their skill in this game allowed them to thrive, their kingdom flourishing in the shadow of Roman power, the scent of their incense perfuming the very empire that posed the greatest threat to their existence.
Every monopoly, no matter how cleverly constructed, is ultimately fragile. For centuries, the Nabataean cartel had thrived by mastering a specific set of challenges: the harsh Arabian desert and the complex logistics of the camel caravan. Their entire economy was built upon the assumption that this mastery was unique and indispensable. But the world was changing. The very superpower that had been their most lucrative client was also a relentless engine of change, driven by an insatiable desire for greater efficiency, lower costs, and absolute control. The dawn of the 2nd century AD would bring two fatal blows to the Nabataean business model, one political and one technological. These forces would render their desert mastery obsolete and shatter the foundations of their commercial empire. The first blow was the inevitable culmination of their long dance with Rome. By the reign of the Emperor Trajan, a military man with a boundless ambition to expand and secure the empire's frontiers, the idea of a semi-independent client kingdom controlling a vital trade route was no longer acceptable. The Romans had a deep-seated institutional bias against middlemen. They always preferred to control a supply chain from source to consumption. In 106 AD, after the death of the last Nabataean king, Rabble II Soter, Trajan saw his opportunity. Citing a minor dispute, his legions marched south from Syria and annexed the entire Nabataean kingdom, incorporating it into the new province of Arabia Petraea. The takeover was swift and met with little resistance. The Nabataeans, ever the pragmatists, likely saw the futility of a war against the empire at its absolute peak. The cartel was now officially out of business. The tolls, the taxes, and the control of the trade routes now belonged directly to Rome. This political annexation, while significant, was arguably less damaging than the technological disruption that accompanied it. For decades, Roman sailors and merchants, guided by the knowledge of mariners from across the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, had been perfecting a new and revolutionary trade route to the east. They had mastered the complex science of the monsoon winds. This was a seasonal weather pattern that created predictable, powerful winds blowing from the southwest towards India in the summer and reversing to blow from the northeast in the winter. For a sailor with a square-rigged ship, this was a game changer. It created a reliable, natural engine for crossing vast tracts of open ocean, a veritable highway of wind. This mastery of the monsoon sea lanes was the single greatest innovation in ancient trade since the domestication of the camel, and it was a direct existential threat to the Nabataeans. A Roman merchant could now load his ship at an Egyptian Red Sea port like Berenice or Myas Hormos, ride the summer monsoon winds directly to the ports of southern Arabia or even further to India, and return on the winter winds, all in a fraction of the time it took a camel caravan to complete its arduous journey. This new route was faster, it allowed for the transport of far greater bulk cargo, and most critically, it completely bypassed the Nabataean-controlled desert. The entire overland incense route, which had been the artery of the world's most luxurious trade for a millennium, was now the slow, expensive, and inefficient option. The economic consequences for the Nabataeans were catastrophic. Their entire business model, built on their control of the land route, was rendered obsolete. The strategic value of their desert outposts, their mastery of the camel, their intricate network of tolls, all of it became irrelevant overnight. Why would a merchant pay the exorbitant fees of the Nabataean cartel and risk the dangers of the desert when he can move more goods, faster, and cheaper by sea? The center of the global economy had shifted. The primary flow of incense, spices, and other Eastern luxuries now traveled by water, directly into the hands of Roman merchants operating out of Egypt. The great pipeline of wealth that had flowed through Petra for centuries had not just been captured by Rome, it had been entirely rerouted. The desert masters had been outmaneuvered by the masters of the sea. The foundations of Petra's prosperity had been irrevocably shattered, not by an army, but by the simple, powerful, and predictable shifting of the wind.
An economy is the lifeblood of a city. When that lifeblood is drained away, the city begins to die. The twin blows of Roman annexation and the ascendancy of the maritime trade routes did not destroy Petra in a single fiery cataclysm. Instead, they condemned it to a slow, lingering, and irreversible decline. The city that had risen from the desert on the profits of a global monopoly now found itself a provincial backwater, a beautiful but increasingly irrelevant relic of a bygone era of ancient trade. The story of Petra's final centuries is the story of a magnificent machine slowly winding down. Its purpose lost, its wealth exhausted, leaving behind only the silent, stone-carved echoes of its former glory. In the immediate aftermath of the Roman annexation in 106 AD, Petra did not collapse overnight. As the new capital of the Roman province of Arabia Petraea, it even experienced a brief period of Roman-funded construction, including the paving of its colonnaded streets and the expansion of the Great Temple. But its fundamental reason for being was gone. The great caravans, the lifeblood of its existence, no longer arrived with the same frequency or importance. The main arteries of the global economy now bypassed the city entirely. Wealth and influence, once concentrated in Petra, now flowed to other, better-positioned cities in the Roman East like Palmyra in Syria or the Red Sea ports in Egypt. The young, ambitious sons of the Nabataean elites no longer sought their fortunes in the caravan trade, but in acquiring Roman citizenship and pursuing careers in the imperial administration. The city's decline was accelerated by a series of devastating natural disasters. A major earthquake in 363 AD rocked the region, toppling many of Petra's freestanding structures, like the Great Temple, and severely damaging its most critical asset, the intricate water management system. The dams, channels, and terracotta pipes that had been the foundation of the city's existence were fractured and broken. For a thriving, wealthy metropolis, this would have been a setback to be repaired, but for a city whose economic engine had already stalled, the cost of rebuilding such a complex system on a grand scale was likely prohibitive.
The hydraulic miracle that had allowed a city to bloom in the desert began to fail, and with it, the city's ability to support a large population dwindled. As the centuries passed, Petra slowly emptied. Its population shrank as families moved away to other more prosperous centers of the Byzantine Empire. The grand tombs, once meticulously maintained, fell into disuse. The bustling markets fell silent. Grass began to grow between the paving stones of the colonnaded street. The city was gradually, inexorably being reclaimed by the desert from which it had been born. Its role as a major center of trade and culture was over. By the time of the early Islamic conquest in the 7th century, Petra was little more than a sparsely populated village, a ghost of its former self. Its monumental architecture a baffling and oversized inheritance for its few remaining inhabitants. Eventually, even its memory was lost to the Western world. The strategic location that had once been its greatest strength now became the reason for its obscurity. Hidden deep within the mountains, far from the new major trade routes, there was simply no reason for travelers to go there. For over 1,000 years, Petra vanished from the maps and histories of Europe, its existence known only to the local Bedouin tribes, who sheltered in its cool tombs and watered their flocks at the trickling remains of its once great springs. The story of the wealthy cartel that has supplied an empire with the scent of the gods had been forgotten, its capital transformed into a mythical lost city. It was not until 1812 when the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, disguised as an Arab scholar, tricked a local guide into leading him to the fabled site, that the West rediscovered the impossible, rock-carved splendor of Petra. The silence was finally broken, and the city could begin to tell its story once more. A story of an empire built on the masterful control of an ancient economy, and a testament to the fact that when the trade stops, the city stops too.
Our investigation began in the shadowy entrance of the Sikh, with the mystery of an impossible city carved from rock. We asked how a nomadic tribe could build a metropolis of such splendor and accumulate wealth that rivaled empires. Having journeyed through their history, their technology, and their ingenious business model, the evidence is overwhelming, and the verdict is clear. The Nabataeans were not simply merchants navigating the desert. They were the architects and operators of a sophisticated and powerful commercial cartel, and Petra was its magnificent fortress-like headquarters. Theirs was an empire built not on territory conquered, but on an economy controlled. We've established that the success of this desert cartel rested upon 3 foundational pillars of genius. The first was their absolute mastery of the environment. Their intimate, ancestral knowledge of the Arabian desert transformed the world's most hostile landscape from a lethal barrier into their greatest strategic asset, and an impenetrable wall against competitors. The second pillar was their revolutionary engineering. We have seen how their miracle of hydraulic technology allowed them to conjure water from rock, giving birth to cities and oases where none should exist. This was matched by their perfection of the camel caravan, a logistical machine that turned the desert into a viable commercial highway for high-values ancient trade. The third and final pillar was their shrewd and ruthless business acumen. Our investigation has shown that they structured their enterprise to systematically eliminate competition and control the market. By seizing control of all critical infrastructure, the oases and the pathways, they created an artificial monopoly. They enforced this monopoly through a complex system of tolls, protection fees, and the ever-present threat of denying water to their rivals. They manipulated information to shroud their sources in mystery and colluded to fix the price of incense at astronomically high levels. This was not the free market at work. This was a centrally planned, brilliantly executed command economy designed for maximum profit. Petra, we can now conclude, was the ultimate expression of this success. It was both the result of their vast wealth and a critical tool of their trade. Its impregnable location made it the perfect vault for their goods and profits, while its stunning cosmopolitan architecture served as a powerful statement of their stability and power, awing both clients and competitors alike. It was the central node from which they managed every facet of their commercial empire. Ultimately, however, our investigation found that the very forces that defined the Nabataean success also contained the seeds of their demise. Their empire model was predicated on the mastery of a single specific technology, the overland caravan route. We have seen how this model was shattered by two unstoppable forces. The first was the political force of Roman annexation, as the superpower decided it would no longer tolerate a middleman. The second, and more decisive, was a technological force of innovation, the Roman mastery of the monsoon sea lanes, which rendered the desert caravan obsolete. The Nabataean cartel was not conquered in a great battle. It was simply bypassed, outmaneuvered, by a faster, cheaper, and more efficient global economy. Therefore, the final conclusion is this: the Nabataeans engineered one of history's most remarkable empires, transforming sand, scarcity, and scent into a civilization of stone and splendor. They were proof that in the world of ancient trade, the control of a critical choke point could be as powerful as any legion. Petra stands today as the silent, beautiful monument to their genius, and as a timeless cautionary tale of how even the most perfect monopoly can be broken, leaving only echoes in the stone.
The story of the Nabataeans did not end with the fall of a city, but with the quiet redirection of the world's commerce. The great caravans faded into the desert landscape. The bustling markets of Petra fell silent, and the roar of global trade moved to the open seas. Yet, the disappearance of their kingdom does not diminish the brilliance of their achievement. To walk through the sick and stand before the treasury today is to witness a profound and enduring echo, a lesson in stone about the timeless relationship between ingenuity, geography, and the flow of wealth. The Nabataeans were more than just clever traders. They were a blueprint for how a civilization can be engineered from the most unlikely of materials. Their legacy is first and foremost a testament to the power of adaptation. In an age of great agrarian empires built on fertile river valleys, the Nabataeans built their empire on scarcity. They looked at a waterless desert, a landscape that others saw as a void, and recognized it as a strategic asset. They harnessed the flash flood, mastered the camel, and turned rock itself into a sponge for life. Their story is the ultimate case study in how human ingenuity can overcome environmental limitations, a powerful reminder that the most valuable resources are not always the most obvious ones. In a world now grappling with its own resource scarcity, the Nabataean miracle of creating abundance from almost nothing resonates with a renewed and urgent power. Secondly, the story of the Petra cartel is a masterclass in the geopolitics of trade. The Nabataeans demonstrated that you do not need to command vast armies to become a world power. By identifying and seizing control of a critical choke point in the global supply chain, they were able to project influence far beyond their military capabilities. Their wealth allowed them to negotiate with superpowers, to fund diplomacy, and to build a civilization that commanded respect. This principle remains a central feature of the modern world, where nations and corporations vie for control over shipping lanes, pipelines, and digital networks. The Nabataeans were the ancient masters of this game, proving that whoever controls the artery controls the flow of life. But their story is also a powerful and sobering cautionary tale about the relentless nature of innovation. The Nabataeans perfected one system of ancient trade to a degree that had never been seen before. Their caravan machine was a marvel of logistics. Yet they were ultimately undone not by a superior caravan, but by an entirely new system that made theirs irrelevant. The mastery of the monsoon winds by Roman sailors was a disruptive technology that fundamentally altered the economy of the ancient world. It is a lesson that echoes in every boardroom and government office today. The greatest threat to a successful business model is often not a direct competitor, but a technological shift that changes the rules of the game entirely. The magnificent ruins of Petra stand as a silent monument to a brilliant business model that failed to adapt to a changing world. Thus, to journey to Petra is to journey into the heart of these timeless themes. The city's beauty is not just in its carved facades, but in the audacity of its very existence. It is a symbol of a people who built their world on a foundation of knowledge, engineering, and shrewd economic control. The silent tombs and empty colonnades are not just relics of a lost civilization, they're the enduring records of a grand and successful experiment in creating an empire of commerce.
an empire born from the scent of the gods and the mastery of the desert.